I think that I have a great belief that the human ability is going to triumph all. And so even as AI takes over jobs that we know today, I think kids should not feel worried.
Sure.
They should focus on the now rather than worry about the future. My father was a poet, an Urdu poet.
Oh, wow.
And one of his last poems that he wrote before he passed away many years ago was just about that, right? And it was Chandani mein chand ki baatein karo. Chandani mein chand ki baatein karo, zikre mazi, fikre farda mat karo. So don't worry about the future. Don't get lost in your past.
Right.
Live in the today. And focus on today. And as students, you have to focus on the fundamentals.
Yeah.
Learn the fundamentals, learn how to apply the fundamentals. Don't remain theoretical.
Yeah.
And as long as you have those skills, like the Martian movie, even if you find yourself on Mars, you'll figure out a way.
Hi friends, and welcome to this exciting episode of Leading with Data. Today I have with me Dr. Sarabjot Singh Anand, who is a co-founder and chief data scientist at Tatras Data. His LinkedIn profile says, educate, innovate, and give back to society. And it's a mantra which has resonated really well with me. Dr. Sarab is... he has been in the academia, he has been in the industry, brings immense experience. And every time I interact with him, I just walk out with a lot more energy. So thanks for taking time out, Dr. Sarab, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kunal. Welcome to our offices. Really happy to have you here.
Yeah. So, Dr. Sarab, would you like to know about your journey, how it started, and then, you spent obviously quite a bit of time in academia. You have, I think, more than 90 publications.
Mm-hmm.
So how was that journey? And then, why did you decide to start your own company and then move back to India? So just I want to hear it from you.
Sure, Kunal. So I think, my association with data started back in 1992.
Okay.
And that was by accident.
Okay.
I did my maths honors degree from Hindu College in Delhi University, and I moved to the United Kingdom to do a master's in what was called engineering computation.
Okay.
So I did a BA degree in mathematics.
Wow.
So went to do engineering computation, which is really looking at how can you apply computers to engineering problems.
Right.
Completed my master's there. With God's grace, did quite well. So the professor who was, my tutor on my master's thesis offered me a research position.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that professor was from the civil engineering department.
Okay.
And we were to develop software for optimizing the layout of reinforcement within concrete. Right. Of course, it was an optimization problem. So it was interesting in that sense that I got exposed to optimization for the first time. And but after around 7 or 8 months, I realized that I was banging my head against concrete. Wasn't enjoying the work I was doing there. And again, with God's grace, I had an opportunity to get another research position. And that research position was actually to do with building a large database of essentially house maintenance, government housing maintenance. And we were working with ICL and Fujitsu and companies like this to build this system. And the project got completed sooner than the research funding had completed. And so my professor then, David Bell, suggested, why don't you look at this new emerging area called knowledge discovery in databases?
Right, KDD.
KDD,
Yeah.
Right? And so at that time, KDD was just a workshop in AAAI.
Right.
And he said, go and attend it. So I went and attended my first KDD in 1993, I think.
Okay.
And, there were some great papers at even that stage by Porrick Smith from Jet Propulsion Laboratories, talking about analyzing satellite images on Mars to understand what is the volcanic activity happening there. And that caught my imagination, and I thought, wow, this is really cool stuff, right? And that's where the journey really started.
Very interesting. And so at that time, was this a field which people were getting into, or was it unheard? I mean, how was it at that time?
Well, I mean, you know that AI has been, of course, a subject of research from the 1950s. So it had been in the laboratories for a while. But the early 1990s is where it was coming out of the research labs and being applied for the first time. Rakesh Agarwal from IBM's research labs in Almaden had published his association rule algorithms papers, the a priori algorithms. And, they were trying to apply this stuff in the real world and getting some success. Right. And of course, there were some very innovative companies. There was a company called Integral Solutions Limited, based out of Reading in the United Kingdom, of all the places, that had actually started building a visual programming interface for machine learning, a workbench, right, called Clementine.
This is back in 93.
So this was probably closer to 97 or so, and there was some, thought leaders there even at that time.
Interesting. And at this time, you were thinking to be in the research side of things, in applied industry, or how were you thinking about your career?
So, like I said, I got into this almost by accident, right? I did well academically in the masters, so I ended up in a research position. Actually, in the United Kingdom at that time, the easiest way for a foreigner to get a job was in research. And so I went that route, right? While I was doing research, I ended up then being offered an opportunity to do a PhD part-time. And I took that on and completed my PhD in 2000. And at that point, we had already spun out our first spin-out of the university, a startup in the area of machine learning. Right. So in 1999, three colleagues of mine from the university, we started up a company called Minet. And Minet primarily started because this Integral Solutions Limited got bought by SPSS. And at that time, we were in a European project with them where we were developing a sequence pattern discovery algorithm and had developed this algorithm that was more efficient than a lot of algorithms that were out there. Clementine did not have one of those algorithms. And of course, SAS had one. So SPSS says, we are going to buy Clementine only if you have a sequence pattern discovery algorithm. So they essentially licensed Capri, which was our algorithm. And we set up the company to support SPSS in their sales of that algorithm.
And this was set up in that way from the start, or happened later on?
It happened during the acquisition, right? And we had a good working relationship with Dr. Alan Montgomery, who was the CEO of the company. And so he said to us, why don't you do something yourselves and, get into business with us? So that's how we started. Then, of course, at that time, we had also been doing a lot of work on analyzing clickstream data to build recommender systems, right? So in the early 2000s, we had actually built some recommendation technology using sequence patterns and also clustering of clickstream data. And we had built this whole workbench for analyzing clickstream data. Had some very nice collaborations with Bamshad Mobasher from the US Chicago-based professor from DePaul University. And the rest is history. We had a great time, developed some great technology along with him and others that were working in this space.
So you set this company up, Mind IT Solutions. It gets acquired, Singh?
Yes. So we essentially Minet at one stage. We then raised venture capital and we changed our name to Lumio. We were going at a great pace to make history, and then, of course, the internet bubble burst. So in 2003, we were working again on some European projects, research projects with a few of our colleagues across Europe. And we decided that we were going to sell the technology and the company and move back to academia. We had that option. And so by 2003, we sold and came back to academia. And that's when I moved to Warwick, actually. So prior to that, I was in Northern Ireland.
So before joining back at Warwick, you had already scaled up a venture and sold it.
Yes.
So why get back to academia, and what was the thought at that time?
Well, actually, because we were a spin out from the University of Ulster in Belfast, and they were partners of ours, they had said to us, we are keeping your academic positions available. You're welcome to come back, right? And so when we sold, some of us actually, two of us decided to come back to the university. One of the others moved on and stayed in the industry. Academia, we'd always kept a relationship, right? So I was the CTO of the company. I was in charge of research and development. And so, we started around 1999, if I remember correctly, these workshops at AAAI and IJCAI, where Bamshad Mubashir and I were the co-chairs of this series of workshops called Intelligent Techniques in Web Personalization. And so that was, again, before Rexis became a conference, right? And, so we continued to stay active in research. So academia seemed like a good place for us.
Yeah. And at that time, the thought was just to kind of take it, and as the domain grows, or you wanted to spend time in academia? I mean, what was the...
I enjoyed teaching. My heart is in teaching, right? And hence I've continued to do it even after coming back to India. So I wanted to go back, to my roots, continue to do research in recommender systems. And I felt that there were ample opportunities to continue to do consulting for companies, while you were in academia. In the West, it's the norm in many ways, right? So it was the best of both worlds.
And then when did you decide to come back to India? How did that happen?
So it took me 8 years. So I was teaching for 8 years at Warwick, and at that time I was consulting for a US based e-commerce business. And this gentleman, Noah Gresham, he came to me one day and said, "Look, we are doing such good work and I'm really excited about data. Why don't we do something together?" So he said, "I see that this space is going to explode. Why don't you go back to India, start creating the infrastructure for providing services to businesses in the West?"
And this was 2012.
So, I thought, not a bad idea. My mom in India is growing a little older. It'll be nice to come and spend time with her. The kids were young enough, so I decided, let's go back.
Okay, interesting. And it was with a clear thought that you will come here and set what is now Tatras.
Yes.
So tell us the stories behind Tatras Data. If I have to double click, for example, what were the initial years? What was the thought? And then how did it pan out?
Sure. So, initially, because we had already been doing work for e-commerce, specifically what we had done for Noah's business was, he had been in fact, he tells a very interesting story. In the early days of the internet, the Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, was very interested in talking to people who wanted to be entrepreneurial on the internet. And so they brought together a small group of people. He was one of them, luckily enough. He wanted to do something around, he's an avid golfer. And so he thought something around content and golf would be something that he would develop. At the same time, there was a strange person sitting at the table who had this weird idea of selling books on the internet. So, exactly, right? So, that person happened to be Jeff Bezos. Noah's ideas didn't work as well, but, I think he managed to build this e-commerce business selling office supplies and printer supplies, and was one of the early takers when it came to digital marketing, and paid advertising on Google. But after the early days when they were one of the first few to start selling online, the products he was selling were getting commoditized. The advertising was getting more expensive. Yeah. And so he was really looking for somebody who could help him leverage data, which he had plenty of, to optimize his business processes. Okay. So what we did for him, and this is going back, I guess, to 2008, 2009, right, when I was working as a consultant, was to say, let's start to build lifetime value models for your customers. Okay. Let's understand where you are acquiring them. Let's get aggressive in those channels in bidding and find better fish rather than more fish, right, in terms of customers. So we built up that idea. We also then looked on the back end where he was drop shipping from suppliers all of the products that were being purchased. And we looked at how can we build optimization algorithms that can reduce the cost of fulfillment. Right? And so we created this least cost fulfillment algorithm. And suddenly when we got that out into his back end, suppliers started coming to him and saying, why aren't you buying as much from me? And he was able to say, well, I'm using AI to do it. It's not in my hands anymore. So you must not be giving me the best prices. And so we were able to increase his profitability by reducing his costs and, of course, making him more efficient in acquiring customers that he could retain and make more value out of.
And this was all happening in US?
In the UK.
In the UK?
Yes,
okay,
yeah. So he was in the US, but his business was actually, he also was selling in the UK and in France. So he had kind of three businesses in these three countries. And so we kind of started to make, turn the businesses around, increase their profitability. And so Noah got so excited. He said, you go back to India, I'm going to find a buyer for my business, sell it, and I'm going to come full time into this, right? Oh. So initially when I moved back here, we actually set up Tatras, as the data company that was going to deliver these solutions to e-commerce in general, right? And we very domain specific to start with. And the whole idea behind the name was that, it comes from Punjabi, Tattva in Punjabi is tat. So getting to the tat of the problem, right? Or getting to the essence of the problem and feeling the taste of success, right? So Tatras in that sense. So, I thought I'm back in India. I want to kind of, immerse myself back in what India is to me, right? And so that's why we went back to the roots to create the name. Of course, everybody in India also calls it Tatras instead, which is very frustrating for me because, you would think, come on, at least in India, you'd know better. But, the whole journey at that point was very much focused on e-commerce. But we evolved from there and started becoming fairly agnostic in our vertical that we worked in.
And you obviously chose to set it up in Delhi. How big was the initial team and what was the growth journey from?
So the initial team was one, which was me, in a fairly lonely office in Green Park, in fact. Delhi was the obvious choice because I grew up here. And, part of my reason for coming back was that my family is here, my mother is here. And also for the kids, it was great because they got into the British school and they could continue in the same kind of curriculum, right? So it was very comforting in that sense. And I think for anybody coming back to India, if you get your kids settled, that's half the battle won, right? So started off with just me. We got to around 5 to 7 people in the first few months. It was a hard sell at that point, right? To kind of provide machine learning services. We naively, actually, in many ways, and by design, actually, felt that we want to stick to the machine learning core and not do visualization and business intelligence, a lot of that, right? So we, while there were well-established companies for doing that already, right? The Fractals of the world, Mu Sigma were already there, right? And had raised lots of money. So we felt that let's stick with the high-end deep learning, machine learning expertise that we had. And, it was tough the first couple of years, but then we started getting interesting projects. Like we did one project in Europe where a wind farm wanted us to help them predict the power output in the future, because they have to, within certain error limits, tell the grid how much power they're going to supply. And if they go outside those, there are some, penalization that happens. And so, we started to find that the market was opening up, the understanding was getting better, and we started to slowly grow from there.
Interesting. And just a follow-up question on this, right? So usually when you would go to business and pitch a solution to the problem, you would probably be open to any kind of solution, right? It could come in visualization, it could come from, let's say, basic business analytics. So how were you tackling that situation that you are only focused on this? So were you rejecting some of the business, or were you doing a lot of due diligence upfront? So how was that?
Yeah, so we actually started to realize that we are making it difficult for ourselves.
Okay.
But then, of course, walking a difficult path is a fun thing to do. So what we did a few years into this, when we actually found exactly what you were saying, right? People were saying, I want this visualization done. And we were saying, well, that's not really what we do. We decided that we'll focus on startups.
Okay.
Now, startups do very interesting things.
Right.
They don't fall into verticals very easily sometimes. And of course, their cash flow can be rather bouncy and volatile. And so, but we decided that, it's okay. We'll focus in that area, because actually a lot of the larger companies wouldn't want to even touch them with a barge pole for all those reasons that I was saying. And so that's what we started to do. We started to focus on startups.
Interesting. And which startups were these? Were they
all US based, primarily, because, to be fair, the Indian market does not really support the kind of, pricing that we were looking to do. And so, in the early days, we started working with a company that wanted to build an app where you could open up your fridge, take a photograph of the fridge, and you wanted to get recipes recommended to you. A lot of my research in the later part of my career in academia was around recommender systems. Right. So in fact, I chaired ACM's Rexis in 2012 when it was in Dublin, just before I left and came back here. Right. And since then, I've been on the program committee also. And so we worked on that project and built an app. We worked with another startup based out of the UK, where a PhD student of mine was their chief data scientist, looking at recommendation of fashion. Right. And we built some technology that is part of their product set that is now being used by the likes of Marks and Spencer's and other retailers in the UK. And so a lot of work was around recommendation. But these are some of the startups that we started with.
And how were you reaching out to these startups? Was it through network or
through the network?
Through the network, absolutely. And when you were going through this journey, were you still in touch with the academia in India or in US or in UK?
So, interestingly, because I left straight after my undergrad degree, I left India. Right. I didn't really have any connectivity to the academia in India. Right. I did stay in touch with the academia in the West, and continued to review papers for conferences and so on. Right. And in fact, we even organized a masterclass in data science in Bangalore, a number of years ago, where we had Bhiksha Raj come from Carnegie Mellon, and a bunch of others, really, really good people. So, we were able to kind of work the network to try and bring some interesting, opportunities for our folks in India to learn from the very best, right? So even Jaime Carbonell, who was here physically teaching, right? And unfortunately, he passed away a few years later. But, he's kind of the godfather of natural language processing in many ways. So kept in touch.
And how was the talent situation during this phase in India? Were you finding talent easily, or were there some channels which were better for you? How were you finding these people who were interested in machine learning and the researchers you would need?
With great difficulty, right? I mean, I think being in Delhi didn't help either. Bangalore would have been easier and better. And so in 2018, we started Sabudh Foundation with the intention of training our own. Right. And so we decided we're going to get the best of curriculum. Bhiksha Raj provided his content to us for deep learning. Another friend of mine from Portugal, a professor, senior professor in Europe, provided his content, as well. And of course, I had my content from Warwick. So we all collaborated and pulled content together, created a curriculum, and we decided to provide it for free to students so that it doesn't become a barrier to entry.
Yeah, in fact, for the benefit of the audience, can you describe Sabudh Foundation and the great work which you do there?
Sure.
I think it is worth bringing out.
Sure. So, Sabudh Foundation as an idea came out of actually some work that, a friend of mine was doing in the US. Through the academic networks. In fact, it's an interesting story because my PhD external examiner was Professor Nada Lavrach from Slovenia. And through people I met in her lab, I got to know Raed Ghani. And Raed Ghani, who spent a number of years after graduating from CMU, he was working in Accenture, decided he was sick of making rich people richer, which are his words. And so he left Accenture and joined the Obama campaign as his chief data scientist, got him, for the second term into the White House, but said, I'm not going to stay here. So he decided to start up the first data science for social goods center in the University of Chicago. And I was very excited about this idea, right? There was always a part of me that wanted to do something that can impact society. And, I come from a home where this was very much encouraged, and also from a community where it's very much encouraged, right? So, when I saw this, I thought, gosh, what could be a better thing to do in India? I think of India as the land of opportunity when it comes to doing something that can be impactful. And so while, the program that Raed was running was very much focused on people who are working in industry to take a year out and come and work on problems of social impact, right? Data people. I realized that in India, we had to tweak this. We had to have a training component. It's difficult for people to take a year out in the Indian context from industry. So let's train students that are in their 6 months of industrial training during their engineering degree. And with that, use that trained student to develop software and solutions that could have social impact.
Interesting.
Right. And so we started to work with a couple of not-for-profit organizations. For example, there is the Kalgidhar Trust that has 139 rural schools in North India, in Himachal, Punjab, Rajasthan, and Haryana, I think, as well. And we worked with them on looking at how can we build some optimization software for their school buses and even deciding which students should go to which schools, right? They had started to go off the grid by putting in solar panels in some of their schools. So we started saying, okay, can we actually use the weather data experience that we had to try and predict how much power will get generated with the solar panels, and therefore, optimize their staying off the grid in some way by using some kind of storage. We started to work with another organization called the Sikh Foundation. They've been doing a lot of forest plantations all across the world. And so we got these IoT devices that are ambient sound recorders to record the bird sounds in these forest areas, and use deep learning to try and identify the different birds, right? And the idea is to try and start understanding that as the forest grows, how does the mix of birds in the forest change, right? We've, you met Ramandeep, my colleague. He runs the IoT program in Sabudh that came in a few years later. And his students and my students from the data science perspective have collaborated to create a platform for farmers where it becomes like an electronic medical record for a piece of land, right? So for a piece of land, for a farm, So, the idea is, there are crop cycles, right? And so what you want to do is for this piece of land, you instrument it with IoT nodes that Ramandeep and crew have created. That data is coming into the cloud. We are mixing that with satellite data, some drone data, directing the farmer to a location on the farm where we identify stress. Let them take handheld device photographs. We identify, what the issues might be. And we start to create this whole ecosystem for them with the intention being that, farmers, if we can actually start to create an electronic medical record for their farm and create transparency in farming process, can we actually get Indians living abroad to start investing in the futures of farms? Right? And think about the fact that, farmers are debt ridden today. How can we protect those small holding farmers? How can we get them to become entrepreneurs? Right? If a whole village buys a drone, it's not costly anymore, right? And one drone can quite easily image the entire village, right? So can we think of infrastructure like this, right? So my whole mantra has been, can we get data scientists in Sabudh to graduate with a suntan? Because they need to be out in the field, right? And learn what are the problems that people are having.
Wow, that's really inspiring. So how many students do you typically touch in a year? And then how many problems do they work? And how does this mapping happen? And then, what would be the journey of a student in this process?
Sure. So currently, we are taking in around 150 students every 6 months.
Okay.
Right. Now, part of them, approximately half of them, if not a little more, are part-time students.
Okay.
So they take a full year to complete the journey. With the ones that are coming full-time, we start with actually teaching them even Python.
Okay.
Right? We teach them machine learning, deep learning, some natural language processing. Then they have to choose in the very third week of their program a passion project.
Okay.
Right? So the passion project is something that excites them, and we start them down the journey.
Back to the community.
Correct. And so we start them through that journey of research methodology, search what's out there, right? And it's really like that whole journey that they have to go through that typically a data scientist does have to go through, right? Understand the problem, think of a potential solution, research what's out there, start to try out some ideas, build out some innovations that you may feel can improve on the quality of what you're getting, and then build that out, right? So that's the kind of journey that we want to take them through. Now, I'd be lying if I would say that every student goes through that successfully, right? And, there are students that find it overwhelming and don't get as far as they want to. But the whole idea here is that on our LMS system, we want it to consist of the entry point being a museum of ideas, right? So you enter there, you have what we call the mosaic, right? Where you go in and there are all these ideas of half-finished projects. And so now those can inspire you. You can actually say, okay, why don't I create a team around that and try and create a solution? Now, in an ideal world, we'd want to be working with not-for-profits for every project, but sometimes we don't get that. Right? Sometimes we actually come across somebody who's suffering from a particular problem and we build a solution for them, right? Or try and start down that journey of building a solution for them. So, for example, we came across a lady who works for one of the big four accounting firms. For a number of years, went undiagnosed with having a problem called face blindness. She can't recognize people by their face, right? So in her own office, she'd be walking and go right past her boss and not say hello. And you can imagine how dangerous that could be to your health. So, we started thinking that there's an easy solution here, right? We can actually create a device that they can clamp onto their glasses that has a camera, can do face recognition, and can speak to them through Bluetooth and tell them, hey, your boss is coming along. You may want to smile at them and greet them, right? So as we started working with the solution for her, we actually came across people who were losing their sight, right? Very, very wonderful professionals who had done great in their career, but because of diabetes or some other complication are now losing their sight. And we started to say, okay, how can we extend this hardware that we've created? to include object detection, right? Simple things like I asked this gentleman, I said, so how do you even, make payments to people, right? And he says, well, what I did was I got rid of my driver who couldn't read and write, got somebody who was educated as my driver, and now he doubles up at somebody who writes the checks out for me, and I sign them. And I said to him that, how do you know who he's writing the checks to? And he laughed and said, I don't. Right? So simple things like this, we are trying to build solutions for as well, right? So we're creating products for accessibility. Unfortunately, a friend of mine recently had a autoimmune disorder due to which he is paralyzed and can only use his eyes. So looking at how can we use gaze-based messaging system for him, right? Which is cheaper than what is available. I mean, he's well off, so he can get stuff from the US, but how many millions of Indians are there that are not that well off and lucky? So can we create something like this? Because imagine the loneliness that somebody feels when they can't communicate, they can't speak anymore, right?
But they don't have any device to communicate.
Right, and AI has all the solutions today for these kinds of things, right? So creating creative, simple solutions for them is what we also work on.
And I'm presuming a lot of these are at POC stage.
They are.
So do you find a manufacturing partner if they have to go into the next stage?
So, yeah, I mean, we are not at that stage yet, right, of finding a manufacturing partner. For the IoT devices, we've actually been able to manufacture nodes ourselves, put them out there, and we now have a well understood process. But if we had to do it at scale, we will have to find those, right? And that's going to be a challenge that we haven't come across yet.
Very interesting. And then through all of these, projects combined, typically how many, let's say, lives or students do you touch through all of these projects?
So in terms of teaching itself, right? So we have our main programs of IoT and data science, where I'm saying it's now around 150 per batch. When we started, our first batch had 7 students, right? We have now also been associated with ICER Mohali for the last 5 years, where along with Professor Arvind in ICER, we created the minor degree program in data science. So we are actually teaching there as well, right? So we touch another 100 students there. Right. Every year, right? So we are teaching the machine learning module out there. So 100 students there. So that's about it now. I mean, earlier I was also the director of computer science at BML Munjal University, and there were like 300 students there that we were touching, right? So
interesting.
Yeah.
Just shifting this topic a bit. Last, 1.5, 2 years has been transformative with the advent of generative AI. And
yes,
while the idea has been for longer, but I guess the momentum and the impact because of ChatGPT. How are you seeing it? You have seen multiple cycles like this.
Sure.
So how are you seeing generative AI, and what are your thoughts on it?
So while I will not be very popular for saying it, we still, probably because of my gray beard, see it as just one tool out of many that are there, right? I mean, to be fair, all of our customers see it as the tool. And so, we've been inundated with work around Gen AI, right? As we get deeper into creating real production systems with it, we understand the problems that exist. And so you do have to build, some kind of a scaffolding around them to produce reliable solutions, in production. But I think it's amazing what it does. And sometimes, it never fails to surprise, actually, right? And you're wondering, like, how is it able to do this, right? In some ways. And partly it's also frustrating because it makes the simplest of errors also, right? So we've been working on some work with generating SQL, right, for a fairly complex domain. And my God, the kind of bizarre issues that we keep coming across, and we are kind of trying to create guardrails and safety around those to be able to kind of get the right answer at the end is very, very interesting.
Yeah, it did surprise a lot of people because people were expecting AI to disrupt the logical fields first and then the quant fields first. What is happening is probably the other way. But let's say if you have to project over the next 2-3 years, what are some of the trends which you see in the industry, and then how do you see the coming years panning out from a generative AI perspective?
2 years from now, if somebody listens to what I'm going to say now, they will say, how wrong was he?
That's the fun of it,
right? I think there will definitely be an understanding of the limitations of generative AI. I think the hype right now is more than it probably warrants. There's some amazing things that are happening, with the image from text generation, the even now text to video generation. There's huge efficiencies that are going to come as a result. That's for sure. They're already coming. We can see them. I've met some people who are doing some very innovative things around education also, right, in this area using Gen AI. And I think that's also spectacular. I would think that, we will see a reduction in the excitement, which will probably be a good thing for people like us, because right now, where we find it difficult is the fact that today Gen AI and ChatGPT specifically has democratized AI to such an extent that everybody can build a solution in AI. And where we find it difficult is that most people say, I can do this for you in 2 weeks. But because we have built production level systems in this, we know it takes more than 2 weeks to do. So whenever we kind of give our viewpoint, we kind of look like people who are making up stories, that it's really tough still, right? And so, that's a thing that I hope that it doesn't burst the bubble and, create too much negativity within the industry where they say, we've tried all these things, but it doesn't work. Right? And I think that's really, really important, that somehow we can navigate through that space. But, look, I have to say that I have been surprised by the quality of what ChatGPT can do. We've played with a few other models, of course, both open source and proprietary ones. It's mind-boggling in many ways.
And you obviously specialize in recommendation engines as a area. Have you tried applying Gen AI to build a recommender engines, and what was the experience if you did?
So not specifically to build recommender systems, but what we have done is use Gen AI and specifically kind of the NLP side, so the ChatGPT kind of interface as an alternative to the experience that you have on a website, right? So one of our customers, that is a B2B marketing platform. We've built all of their content intelligence. We built recommender systems for B2B content to be delivered to people on their website. Now, over the last year, we've actually worked on building a chat interface also. And the way I look at it is, earlier websites were a buffet. You come and you choose what you want, right? And that's difficult. Personalization made it, here's a set that we think, right? A personalized menu for you. Now you're saying, get the product officer, right? The chief product officer out. I want to have a chat with him, right? And there we have integrated to some extent recommendation technology, because we know when somebody comes onto the website, what have they been consuming in the past? If they are an existing customer or in the CRM system, we can incorporate that data also and figure out, here is some content or here are some questions that he may be interested in asking, right? So we are recommending questions that are in the chat interface so that you have easy access to it and say, you probably have an interest in these things. So you can just choose the question and start the chat. Now the chat is also contextualized using the RAG framework, but what we are doing is we are filtering content using recommendation technology to say, here is the content that is probably more appropriate to what he's asking, and applying that RAG on that, right? So we've kind of done that kind of stuff with it.
Interesting. Because that's actually very similar to a problem we are working on internally on analytics with that any learner who is coming,
right?
How can you make their journey more seamless?
Absolutely.
And, we are in middle of trying some of these things. So great to hear that. And personally, if you have to, let's say, put a time frame on, let's say, consistent or logical outcomes coming out of generative AI systems?
You're asking me really embarrassing questions, right? I'm going to give all the wrong answers. I would probably have said, 2 years ago, I would have probably said 10 years away. now I'm saying maybe, 3 to 5 years, and I'm probably going to be proven wrong, right? I think, I would think we still have some time for humanity.
Right. One of the things which has happened because of Gen AI momentum, everyone talking about it is, and this is something which I've seen personally. A lot of students are now coming assuming they can start their journey in generative AI and not learn, let's say, the basics or fundamentals as we know.
Yes. Yeah.
So what is your advice to people who are, let's say, starting out now? Yeah. What is the right path? Because it is more accessible that you could do prompt engineering and build something.
Sure.
But at the same time, if you do that, you can't really build a system and productionize it.
Right.
So how do you, what would be your recommendation to a student who is starting now?
Yeah, well, my recommendation would be look at the housing industry. We haven't stopped building foundations.
Right. That's a great analogy.
Right. So, if I look at my maths degree, I don't remember a lot of the maths that I was taught. I have obviously, specialized in certain aspects of the maths, but what it taught me was a way to think. And that's really important, right? How to think through problem solving. And to have the tools to create solutions. And this goes back to the whole idea of graduate with a suntan. And the tools that you still need is mathematics, in my view, right? And so, the way we teach in Sabudh, a lot of people say, you don't need this. I get calls from students who are now doing masters in Canada saying, sir, you taught us this stuff. I didn't listen to you then, but can you just explain it to me again? Right? Because वहाँ जाके सब सीधे हो जाते हैं, right? In the sense they go there and they realize that the masters, they're being taught these things. And at that point, they realize that it is important, right? And to some extent, especially in Sabudh, they're getting it for free, so they think free stuff is not very good, right? So unnecessary. But I think having the foundations still remain important. To still understand, and we kind of try to explain to folks that even when we are teaching convolutional neural networks, right? It is, why is a one-by-one convolution important, right? What is it doing, right? Today, Gen AI has made it inconsequential, right? And that's worrying, because I think, like I said, there are certain limits to where it's going to be. We can either wait for OpenAI to continue to innovate and then create solutions, or we can create solutions along the way. And to create the solutions along the way, you need to think through and diagnose, right? So when we started this project on, natural language to SQL, the kid that was working on it was thinking, I'll just give it to the LLM and, it's done. 2 week scenario, right? The 2 week syndrome, maybe we should call it that, the 2 week syndrome. And I sat down with him and he was saying, this doesn't work. So I said, okay, first of all, sit down here and look at the natural language query and say, how would I solve this as a human?
Correct.
And break it down into the steps that you would follow and help the LLM
to become better.
To become better by saying, why don't you break it up into these pieces? And so, yes, this is prompt engineering, right? But you've got to think about, how will I solve the problem? It's not magic, right? There's a lot of hard work and research that's gone into the architectures that build these LLMs and fuel these LLMs. So think about it a little bit yourself, right?
One of the things which I remember, I don't know whether you would, so there was this online event we had done in 22 called 1729, in which you were
Fractal. Yes.
Right? And your talk was actually on the third day, and then there was Guinness World Records presentation ceremony after that.
Okay.
But the way you were teaching, it was so inspiring, and then it almost felt like a crime to stop you at that time. And then one of the things which has stayed in my mind since then is how do you prepare for let's say if you have to teach something to the students tomorrow, what goes at the back of that talk, because it's so beautiful, it's so inspiring when you teach. So what goes at the back of these talks and lectures and sessions?
That's very kind of you to say. I think students will be shocked to know I typically go in with a kind of idea of what I want to cover. And often conversations with students take them in opposite directions or different directions, right? But I think what I have learned by listening to a lot of really, really good teachers, right? And Bhiksha Raj is one of them. He's just like amazing. Is that it's storytelling, right? And you're thinking of innovative ways in trying to bring in even personal stories, right, into conversations to make them realize that, it's actually making sense before you introduce them even to the maths of it. But then bringing in the maths in a way that hopefully is more, achievable for the student, right, or understandable or attainable. So that's kind of typically the way I think about it. Now, when I started to learn machine learning, I always thought of each of these algorithms as silos, right? But with the years going by, what I've realized is that machine learning is a continuum, right? And you can really kind of start to show similarity between all of these, but very different thought processes, right? And that's what I find really exciting about it. And so trying to teach that way, to say, hey, we think of matrix factorization has nothing to do with linear regression, for example. But really, does it not? And that is what is, I think, what I try and bring out when I'm teaching.
And then, this idea, if you extrapolate a bit more, is the basis of this book called The Master Algorithm, right?
Right.
Ultimately, it converges.
Yes.
So, great. And usually towards the end of these shows, we ask our guests some of the books which have had the largest impact on you, or you would recommend the students. So what would be those in your case?
Okay, so I'm very bad with remembering books or people's names, so I'll try my best. But my favorite book for a long time was Tom Mitchell's Machine Learning, right? And then there is the book by the Stanford professors of statistics, Friedman, I think, and the Elements of Statistical Learning. So those are the two that I kind of find. Now, the truth is, because of the fact that I have been lucky enough to be in this domain for a long time and having gone to talks by people, I've learned a lot from just listening to people, right, and how they explain things. And so, when students ask me, what's the best book to go after, I find it difficult to really recall, partly because of my own memory limitations. But I think those two definitely stand out for me.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Dr. Sarabjot, for taking time out. Any last word of advice? Anything else which you would want to mention?
I think I have a great belief that the human ability is going to triumph all. And so, even as AI takes over jobs that we know today, I think kids should not feel worried.
Sure.
They should focus on the now rather than worry about the future. My father was a poet, an Urdu poet.
Oh, wow.
And one of his last poems that he wrote before he passed away many years ago was just about that. Right? And it was, Chandani mein chand ki baatein karo. Chandani mein chand ki baatein karo, zikre mazi, fikre farda mat karo. So don't worry about the future. Don't get lost in your past. Live in the today. And focus on today. And as students, you are you have to focus on the fundamentals. Learn the fundamentals, learn how to apply the fundamentals. Don't remain theoretical. And as long as you have those skills, like the Martian movie, even if you find yourself on Mars, you'll figure out a way.
That's so powerful. That's so. Thanks for sharing that, Dr. Sarab. And again, once again, thanks for taking time out. Great talking to you once again.
It's a pleasure, Kunal.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you.